Hi everyone, this is my presentation on the Pawtucket Heart Health Program. So the introduction. So the Pawtucket Heart Health Program is funded by a research grant from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute in the late 1970s. So around 1978 through 1980, the Institute provided research grants to different cities, and Pawtucket was one of the recipients. Pawtucket is a city in Rhode Island and had a population size of 71,204 individuals in the 1980 US Census. So the purpose of the Pawtucket Heart Health Program was to examine the impact of heart health education programs on the risk factors of developing cardiovascular disease. So whether it increased or it decreased the risk of individuals essentially developing a cardiovascular disease, so projecting what potential rates would be. So two risk factors to cardiovascular disease include high blood pressure and high levels of HDL, which is the unhealthy one of the cholesterol. So HDL versus LDL, so high density lipoproteins versus low density lipoproteins. So those are kind of the two right before developing that cardiovascular disease. And so those the risk factors that increase high blood pressure and increase those high levels of HDL include diet, smoking, body weight, so increased levels of obesity, and age will also play a role in increasing high blood pressures and those high levels of HDL cholesterol. So the methodology of the study. So the study design was an observational cross-sectional study that utilized surveys, and they provided them to approximately 15,261 participants. And that was between Pawtucket and their comparison city. So the comparison city in the study was kind of the control group of the study. And Pawtucket was the one that received the heart healthy education programs, and the comparison study did not, but they were similar in characteristics of Pawtucket. And so they were kind of the point of reference for if there were, increases or decreases in risk factors for Pawtucket. And in the study, they had participants that varied in ages from 18 to 64. They included both female and male, and of all sorts of different educational backgrounds. They didn't have a specific set of individuals as long as they were obviously 18 to 64, and they resided in Pawtucket through the duration of the surveys. And so I kind of grouped what are considered the intervention programs, so the health education or the health promotion programs that they provided, into about three different groups, so three overall types of programs. The first was more so about teaching the community in Pawtucket about healthy behaviors for decreasing the risk of cardiovascular diseases, but also teaching them about the risk factors that do contribute to the diseases. So what does that look like, and what does it mean? And mostly kind of teaching them the foundational knowledge of they can improve their understanding of the risks that cardiovascular disease have on their lives and their longevity of the lives essentially too. The second type of program, or the type of health education program that they had, included the grocery stores and the restaurants, and that was proper labeling of their food. So restaurants on their menus highlighted heart healthy foods, and then in grocery stores it made sure that the appropriate labels for healthy foods were available, and then same thing for the unhealthy labels. So when people would go and pick something off the shelf, they knew that, oh, this is good for my health and this is bad for my health, essentially. And then the third was opening up essentially weight loss groups, smoking supports groups in order to get people to stop smoking, nutrition programs, and exercise courses. And the researchers really wanted to emphasize that these courses were affordable and they were accessible, so minimizing the barriers that may come up for some individuals that can't afford or aren't readily accessible to them as well. The data collected for the study included that of the cross-sectional surveys, and those were administered every 2 years with a duration of 1 year per survey collection. So if they had administered a survey in 1980 which is the year that the study began, from start to finish of collecting the survey for that year, it took an entire year. And so they were administered every 2 years. And the programs also documented the amount of participants interacting with with the program. So kind of that like participation interactions essentially, but they didn't break it down to this program had more or another program had less. It was just kind of an overall of kind of those interactions that they had with the participants. The variables measured, so the main variables that the researchers looked at were the total cholesterol levels, the systolic and diastolic blood pressure, height and weight as well. Sociodemographics were also included in cross-sectional surveys, but they weren't really considered the main variables as what I just listed. But they did take into consideration their age, their gender, and the level of their education as well. And so for the results of the study, I just wanted to point out the cross-sectional surveys. So they were performed, like I said, they were performed in 2-year increments. And in so 1981, 1983, 85, 87, and then 1990, and then 1982. Then the values that are in the parentheses are the number of respondents that they had for each survey group, and it was between the two, between Pawtucket and the comparison city. And it kind of broke down almost evenly or about similar to each other. It wasn't a drastic increase in one over the other, but you can see kind of like the fluctuations that occur throughout the years that the surveys were administered. And right below that, the body mass index, there was a statistical significance observed in increased body mass index in Pawtucket and the comparison city by the last survey year. So by 1982, they did notice that increased body mass index for both cities. For blood pressure and cholesterol, no statistical significance was found, but systolic and diastolic pressure did slowly decrease over the duration of the surveys, but they weren't statistically significant. And as far as cholesterol levels, about the same. So they did decrease over time, but there was nothing that was statistically significant between the two or one over the other. And in the cardiovascular risk, Pawtucket demonstrated a small statistical significance in their decreased projection. So those decreased risk factors that would essentially predict or project the cardiovascular diseases throughout the course of the surveys. But it was a small statistical significance. So like I said previously, like it wasn't as, a drastic change between one versus the other. It was small, but it was statistically significant for Pawtucket. For the limitations, Carlton et al. Did not capture if one program had more success than the others. And so as I mentioned earlier, it didn't necessarily state that one program had more participants than the other, or this program had less participants than the others as well. And I found that to be a limitation of the study. Another limitation of the study was that survey respondents did not specify if they were participating in a program. So you didn't know, in each survey period, if there was an increase or a decrease of participation in those programs. It was based off of what those risk factors were showing. And so that was another limitation that I found. And so an improvement that would be based off of those limitations would be to capture what programs have those higher rates of participation through the advanced, computer technology that can be quickly done. So, it could be a quick checking on an iPad or on a computer or something of that nature where it's just, you have someone present and you're able to capture that in a rapid capacity through appropriate technology. And in a second improvement would be to include in the surveys if respondents are participating in health education or promotion programs, so that you're also able to capture those gaps of, oh, this individual hasn't been participating, so you can kind of maybe follow up with them and determine, well, why aren't you participating? Or you have been increasing your participation in these health education and promotion programs, and determine, okay, well, what changed for you? What is keeping you to come back to those programs or want to go back to those programs or things like that. So I think those would be two improvements that would be significant for future research. So in conclusion, the projected cardiovascular risk in those that were residing in Pawtucket throughout the years was statistically significant, but at a smaller rate. So that may also be a limitation in itself, is that maybe it isn't generalizable to the general public for those that are thinking about implementing health education programs. And so that, that can also be explored in future research projects as well. The accessibility and affordability of health education and promotion can have positive impacts on reducing risk, and that's kind of where, in the limitations, if they had identified if people were or were not attending those programs, then they could kind of trickle down to, well, are the programs accessible to them, or are they even affordable for people to go ahead and join? Somewhere in the study, I mentioned that Pawtucket was on the lower side of the socioeconomic status, so affordability would play a role in, as well as accessibility, as we know from social determinants of health, and those being a huge barrier for many people. Attention should also be paid to the sociodemographics, such as finances, literacy, and accessibility to healthy lifestyle changes. So kind of going on from that accessibility and affordability is making sure that we're identifying those gaps and addressing them, as well as far as changes that can be implemented or ways that health programs can be improved upon or need to kind of, take a different direction in order to really hone in on that financial aspect for many people, or even the literacy levels. Common sense isn't common if they weren't exposed to it previously. So making sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to understand and truly understand what information they're receiving without some sort of judgment, or more so in a safe environment and an understanding environment as well, to make sure that those healthy lifestyle changes are sustainable and aren't just seen within a year and aren't seen 3 or 5 years down the line. And then lastly, future research should also include cross-sectional studies that are longer than a decade to determine the gaps that occur in maintaining health education and promotion programs in communities, to really just drive home the message and making sure that they're supporting their communities in these sustainable lifestyle changes, because they can be very drastic or very impactful for many individuals. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys have any questions or comments, please let me know. And thank you again for watching. These are my references.